In this episode of IT SPARC Cast, WAPO jumps on RTO, OpenAI calls the operator, and VMware offers products for free. Wait, what?
What?
Welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barger.
I'm your host, Lou Schmidt.
It's Friday, November 15th, soon to be known as Mike Tyson Comeback Day.
We'll see. I think the fight in the Senate's going to be even more fun, but still, is everybody having fun today?
IT SPARC Cast is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the news bites. According to The Verge, OpenAI is reportedly planning on launching AI agents early next year. These are part of a project codenamed Operator, in which agents will live on your local computer and be able to run various tasks for you. It's kind of similar to what we've already talked about in the last two episodes that Anthropic and Google have announced with their capabilities to do something similar. So obviously OpenAI can't fall behind, so they're going to be doing this as well. I find this really interesting, and I think that my first thought was, well, how can I use this just in my everyday life to automate tasks? But then I wanted to start thinking about it from an enterprise IT standpoint. And then I started thinking about all of these tasks that a lot of us have to do on a daily or weekly basis, combing through logs, finding issues, looking at dashboards and things like that. So imagine having an agent that runs just before you start your day. Let's call it 8 a.m. And what it does is it combs through every single log file from every different system that you manage and reports out to you the anomalies and puts them in a single simple report. Now, some systems do that for you, but they do that for their devices. Imagine having it go across your networking gear, your firewall, your CRM software, your HR software, your finance software, your virtualization systems, all of that, and putting it into a single dashboard for you. I think that would be really powerful.
You know, the thing that really gets me is we've been reading about this in science fiction for years. If you ever get the chance, go back and read David Brin's Earth, because one of the things he talks about in there, it was pre-internet, right? Before we were calling everything the internet and the World Wide Web. I believe it came out in like 1988 or something. But he's got all that in there. We've seen ads with like a little dog that goes and runs around and gets your stuff. They were all mock-ups. This is real. And what I like about this is, say, John, your example, where you're talking about, I want to read the logs. Well, what if I want you to go through the logs. I want you to give me the anomalies. I want you to compare those anomalies to last week's anomalies. Tell me if there's been a change and look for a pattern in them. The key part of this is, as you've said, there are systems out there that do this, but only within their vendor sphere, right? And imagine combining that with notes or something that you keep on your local computer, and it updates that just like it would update a local database. So now you're trailing a history in your system with your searches done the way you want them done. I am really excited about this.
Yeah, me too. And the thing that I've been thinking about with this is that the last few episodes, we've talked about the ability to create apps through natural language. We talked about Spark last week. We talked about other tools that let you do that. But the problem with that is like, well, what do you do with those once you create them? Where do you host them? What do they have access to? Right? A lot of these systems, for obvious reasons, need to have secure controls over them. So you can't allow a cloud service written by an agent sitting, in some random cloud to have access to your security logs and other systems like that. But if it's on your PC with the right controls in place, you probably could do this. And maybe that's just a matter of exporting those logs or whatever it is to a file share. That's probably not a huge security risk. Then you could take these on. And this now we're talking about is code that's being generated that's telling these agents to do something on your behalf on your trusted PC. And that's where I think it starts to get really interesting. That being said, security is a concern here. And you do want to make sure that you're not writing code or having agents that are then storing this information in, again, some random cloud, or feeding it into an AI learning mechanism, something along those lines. That could be a problematic. So that still has to be addressed before we can recommend rolling this out in your enterprise.
I also have to think that these agents are going to be far more powerful if they can connect to the internet and get data, which means we have to have a way to semantically filter what they do. Now we've seen it, we've had multiple discussions about this. We think this is what Apple is up to probably, but we don't know yet. And things are still early. We're still trying to figure out a lot of the security stuff that we're seeing from some of these startups has sort of boxed around that semantic firewall, if you will.
Yeah.
Keep these ideas where they belong. It's a very, very new challenge and early days, but this is something definitely worth keeping an eye on. And speaking about AI and things worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah. So AI is going to take your job, right?
Maybe. I don't think AI is going to take your job. We've spoken about this a lot, but we do have an example where AI is now generating jobs that's not for programmers. So Salesforce just announced that they're going to hire 1,000 people to do a big AI product sales push. Now, most of the folks in here on Enterprise, you've used Salesforce or you've seen it used, and you probably have your own stories about how much fun that was. Whether it was the Salesforce is always like any ERP technology, it's all in how well the customization worked for your particular sales process, and nobody ever wants to spend the money to get it completely right. So what Salesforce has done, apparently, is they're rolling out something called Agentforce. And what Agentforce allows you to do is build intelligent AI-based agents that will be usable with external customers. If somebody's coming into your support portal, they want to do something, they can get a much richer experience with these enhanced agents, but you can also use them internally. And John and I were talking about this. We're like, well, this has a lot of potential to really bridge the challenges, iteratively bridge these challenges of deploying this type of software. So it's really encouraging to see that on the backside of this AI push, when we start to roll these things out, you're going to need people to go out and do this and help sell it and explain it. And there isn't an AI that sells AIs right now. Right.
It's coming. It's coming.
Oh,
now,
sure.
The thing is information on this is a bit light right now. It appears that the first iteration of this will be some form of chatbot that you might put on your website to allow a customer to come in and say, I need information on this. And it gives you some sort of login and, when's my order going to ship, or who's my sales agent, because I haven't called you guys in 2 years and the person I used to speak to is no longer there, whatever it might be. And I think that that's a good first step. But as somebody that's been forced to use Salesforce extensively in the past, and I was both a product owner and a project manager on a couple of Salesforce application rollouts, I got to say that the interface, I'll be nice, the interface on salesforce.com leaves a lot to be desired. And part of that is how well you implement what you're writing. But at the end of the day, the Salesforce interface is the Salesforce interface. And even with the new Lightning update, it's still not great. So I think the next step that salesforce.com needs to look at is natural language queries and natural language updates from the sellers to be able to say, I just had a conversation with XYZ customer. They've got a new opportunity coming in. They're looking for X number of these widgets and Y number of these widgets, and they're looking to close that by December 31st. That would then go in and update, and which is a big part of what Salesforce is all about, is the sales team having to update, then the higher ups looking at it and using forecasting tools to try to figure out what's going on with their overall forecast. And that's just, it's such a pain for everybody that has to use it. I've been there, I've done it. and nobody wants to do it. You get pushback from the sales team. But if I could do it through voice or just typing in natural language, I might be much more inclined to do it.
You know, there is something going on that's going to drive a bunch of sales in the future. If you're looking at infrastructure, what's driven sales, a lot of the network sales in the past 10 years?
Wi-Fi.
John, you got something. Right, Wi-Fi. What's going on?
According to PC World and some leaked documents that came out about Wi-Fi 8. So I know we're just now rolling out Wi-Fi 7. And so hold on, we're talking about something that's not coming until 2028. And that's about the right cycle. Every 3, 4, 5 years, you see the new generation of Wi-Fi come out. Just by the time you finish rolling out Wi-Fi 7, Wi-Fi 8 will be coming around. But that's okay. What we know about it right now is that it's formally going to be known as IEEE 802.11bn. So it's part of the B train. It's got a subtag ultra high reliability, and that's what they're going to focus on. So the speeds are going to be basically on par with Wi-Fi 7, but they're really going to emphasize on making connections more reliable and more resilient, so you don't have as many drops. I got to say, I do have Wi-Fi 7 on a couple of the access points in my house. Disclosure, I've got 6 access points. It's not that big a house, but I like to play around with things. 2 of them have Wi-Fi 7, and I had to disable the 6 gigahertz radio because of drops. I think if I had more coverage, I'd be fine. But that's what they're going to focus on. The key thing to look at, again, is not peak throughput, but effective throughput. So if I can stay connected better, if I have a more reliable connection, we're going to see this improve for your users.
Well, I think this is the right thing to be doing. Wi-Fi 7 introduced some really cool features, one of which is a new modulation that is 4 times as dense as the previous one. We're always increasing our QAMs in factors of 4, and that gives us quite a lot more symbol coding space. If you played around, it just means less work to send more information. One of the problems that's really struck me, and what I'm going to be very interested to see what happens with Wi-Fi 8, is physics is physics. Wi-Fi 7 will allow you to do sub-channeling for things that need less bandwidth, which pretty much describes almost all of IoT. But everything there has to be running Wi-Fi 7, which means you've got to go rip out all that old stuff to take advantage of these new spectrums. Yeah, these new technologies, these new ways to beacon. So what I'd be very, physics is physics. As soon as I introduce a noise source, it's going to reduce the signal effectiveness.
Lou, I'm wondering how quickly a lot of the IoT vendors will be to move to Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8. And part of the reason for that is a lot of IoT vendors are just appliance vendors or light bulb vendors or whatever that are adding smarts and Wi-Fi into an existing device. And you can buy super cheap, easy to implement, old, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi chips that don't require all of the additional security and capabilities that are required as part of Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8. So that'll be a really interesting thing to see over the next 3, 4, 5 years of how many Wi-Fi 7 enabled devices will roll out. I think you can expect the major vendors will start supporting the Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8, but a lot of that, cheaper IoT gear might not.
They really need to get, this came out of MediaTek, but if you look at the way you design a chip, normally when you're designing an ASIC, say for a washing machine or something specific, air conditioning unit that you're going to put up on top of somebody's roof in an enterprise, you don't design a Wi-Fi core. You grab a license, inexpensive license for a cheap core, and you put it on your die if you're going to do it that way, or you get the cheapest chip you can get. What we need to do is make Wi-Fi 8 cheap, right? You just grab this core and you're good to go. It's not that you're on 2.4. Physics says 2.4 is great if you're going to have a bunch of stuff tucked away in little necks. It's going to go further than 5.8 or 6. But we need really cheap cores so that people will use this. Because to your point about security, John, we need that security in the IoT stuff.
We do.
They don't have it because it costs money. We need to get the money out of that. And, so that we get that great warm feeling being secure.
So speaking of warm feelings, I think you're about to piss me off.
I am going to piss myself off as well. But let's go ahead. We're a little bit passionate about this. Let me go ahead and talk about this. So the next news item we have is really great. We just did our first section on remote work, our March to the Cause rant. And you'll see a link up here, up above my head, where to find that. And next week we'll start detailing even more. But this is an interesting story that I really wanted to highlight. The Washington Post, they want a full 5-day return to office. And their methodology, their call to action on this is, I want that great office energy for us every day. That's what the publisher said, Will Lewis. And so it's been reported that they're ending most remote work for employees. We think this is a serious mistake. And so their policy has been 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. Obviously, the employee union is not wild about this. Union members sent a defiant email back saying, hey, this is a change that further stands to disrupt our work, that improves our, it's not going to improve our productivity or our collaboration. We've already used it. We're going to show you how to fix these problems as we go. So managers, the one thing they are going to do, that if you're going to do this, bring the managers back first, which is what they're doing. They're going to come back, and they're supposed to be back in February of next year. And then according to this, in June, they're going to try to pull everybody else in. My take on this is great if you're sitting in a corner office. If you sit in a corner office, you're used to people coming to you when you want them to give you information. You have an override at all times over what they're doing. Now, I find this to be rather stupid in one respect, which is, if you've got that much clout, you can override virtually as well. John, you've got some feelings about this.
I'm going to try to keep my blood pressure under control here, but Lou and I feel very passionately about this. And what I would say is, you might be asking, like, okay, this is office policy stuff. Why are we talking about this on an enterprise IT podcast? Well, the reason is that we as IT leaders can provide the mechanisms and the tools to allow for efficient remote work situations. If we're not providing those tools, then the higher ups are correct and remote work doesn't work, and you need to have a return to office policy. But then if we can come around and say, look, here's how you save money on office space. Here's how you save money on cooling and heating and meals and all these other things by providing the right tools. And you can save X if you give me half X or a third of X. That's a win-win, and you will retain your top talent. So that's why it's important for IT to be aware of this and know what's going on. We put the link up earlier. I'm going to put it again right above Lou's head. Go listen to that podcast or watch it on YouTube. And I think you'll find it really interesting. This is the first of many. We probably will have at least 10, maybe 20 different episodes on this. The first one is why. Why is this important? And then we'll get into the various stages and eventually into this tool will help here and this tool will help here.
You have the power as an IT person to get a small team together and run a trial. You can run a trial and show the effectiveness of this. You don't really need a lot of approval to pull something like that. Gather data and come up with a better thing. It's not entirely free to do this, but usually these things can be fit in, and you can find motivated users and managers to help you out with this stuff. Now, speaking of free,
this shocked me when I read this morning. VMware is going to make Workstation, or has made Workstation and Fusion, free for everyone. That includes commercial, educational, and personal use.
Are you talking the pro version here?
Yeah, full on version. So
wow.
And that has starting this week. Both versions are getting rid of the paid subscription model, and the free version includes all the features available for the paid products: Broadcom will no longer provide users with support ticketing or troubleshooting, so you're on your own, but it is a free product. And that starts to make sense. I got to imagine that, well, you could always get a free flavor of both of these. And then, there were some advanced features that went along with it. But I can't imagine that Workstation and Fusion's the Mac version for those of you wondering, were really money makers. And this, I think, is a little bit of a peace offering to those of us that have had home labs that are maybe no longer able to get licensing for our ESXi servers, that we have something that we could at least get some basic virtualization on. And honestly, Workstation and Fusion are not bad for those capabilities. It's not quite ESXi. There's a lot of things you can do in ESXi you can't do in the Workstation and Fusion models. But at least you got something. And I think that that's what Broadcom's trying to do here is here's a little bit of a laurel leaf as a peace offering. Now, the question is, how much updates will we see on these going forward? But, it's something.
They said that they're going to continue to update it. There's another aspect of this you may not have covered, which is I've used ESXi. I had a lab with a bunch of ESXi servers in it. Workstation can be the front end, Workstation or Fusion. I usually use Workstation on Linux, though. Workstation could be the front end to building and deploying VMs into that ESXi component.
Sure.
And this strikes me, I think you're right that this is a bit of a peace offering to get people into understanding and using it, get something that they can use day to day where they don't have to dedicate a thing. But I also think this is like giving away the razor handle. This is the front end to your architecture anyway. Instead of developing directly in vCenter, develop on your desktop, push it into vCenter.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it in the past that Broadcom's interested in extracting as much money as possible from its customer base, and that free, when it comes to ESXi, doesn't work for them for that. And that the biggest complaint they're probably getting from the customer base is, look, I get it for the enterprise deployments, but I have a home lab or I have a test lab that is unfunded, and I need to be able to run ESXi and do a number of things there. Like you said, maybe my initial setup before deployment, my initial testing, and so forth. I can no longer do that because you're not allowing me to get these systems for free or for cheap. You want me to you want to charge me, these large fees as if I am running on a 24-core monster server when I'm actually running on a relatively small system. This might address that for a lot of people. So I think that that's a good sign.
Yeah, we were absolutely wondering about this. And in our previous things, we've seen VMware has been kind of flailing around for a couple of years. Yeah. And this makes much more sense.
And now it's time for the CVE of the week.
And this time we have an absolutely lovely one. And I use that in the may you have a lovely day sarcastic sort of mode. So there are 19 security holes in Android that were patched by the last update into Android. 19. All of these things were listed as critical, high severity holes. One of them was a straight up remote code execution. Most of them allowed local privilege escalation. There were one or two denial of service attacks in there. All of them combined allowed you to completely get around the sandbox environment. So the bulk of these, I went through. There was an announcement of this. I saw it through various sources. I went back to the actual Android source and read the bulletin. And the bulk of these were actually through code that was contributed via the chipset vendors. Qualcomm had a huge number on there. I think MediaTek had 2 or 3. Their graphics drivers had holes in them. The thing that I found very concerning was that some of these holes were found in the closed source drivers, coming from Qualcomm. And there's been a lot of people being grumpy about this security and the security and open source community for a while because they could not review that code. And Qualcomm has always been saying, yeah, we look at it, we look at it, we look at it. And I'm sure they do, right? But more eyes make for shallower bugs. And apparently this stuff was caught by the Google efforts, the Alphabet efforts on this particular one. Their research system nailed most of these. I believe some of them are actually actively being exploited. So once again, freaking update. When those things drop, update. This has the potential to pretty much own any Android device you have.
People might think that we're just talking about phones here, and a lot of you are aware, but just to be clear, Android's running on so many different devices. So there's set-top boxes. There's Android's the back end for a lot of different telepresence systems. It's the back end for a lot of inventory control scanner guns that you use, whether you're in retail or some other large inventory-based environment. It's used so many different places. And unfortunately, Android is known for not getting the updates to the devices, people not updating them. And some of these devices, maybe Android was just thrown on it because it was easy to get it. It worked well with a mobile interface, a mobile screen, things like that. And again, this is not a dig on Android. It's actually a great operating system for what it's being used for. But this is a case where you need to be aware of what's on your environment, what's running Android, what's it doing, does it have access to, and is it up to date? And so go take a look at this.
Well, there are 2 CVs out of 19 that are actually being targeted, exploited right now. One of them is CVE 2024-43047, which is a Qualcomm DSP update header vulnerability. We know that that's in the wild. And then the other one is a CVE 2024-43093, which is an Android framework component that could be unauthorized access to get you into the sandbox, right? One of the things that we've been pushing lately, we push this in browsers, we push this in operating systems, is the concept of sandboxes to protect you. One of the key takeaways from this that you should think about is maybe that sandbox isn't going to protect you. You really need to beat the stuffings out of whatever code you're putting into that sandbox. Harden it as much as you can, because it's a nice layer to have, but with this breach, they can get into your sandbox. The other thing you got to think about is this one goes back, I think, all the way to version 11 of Android. John, you absolutely nailed it. I have a coffee machine upstairs that's like, it is the god of all coffee machines. It can emulate anything. And it is actually, it's called a decent espresso machine. I highly recommend it. It's lovely. It's shipped with a tablet that was on Android 9 and could not be upgraded. And when I said, hey guys, what's up with this from a security perspective? And their answer was, don't connect it to the internet. I'm like, okay. The thing is, I get it. These are coffee people. This guy is a programmer who started this and his partner, and they make the coolest coffee machine on the planet, in my opinion. But it ain't secure. It's an IoT device.
That's the classic problem with IoT devices. And they might be running Android, they might be running a variety of Linux, they might be running Windows CE. Who knows what they might be running? Wow. But these folks are really good at making coffee machines or air conditioning systems or HVAC or whatever it might be. But they don't know anything about security. Maybe they hired the right people, right? But a lot of times they just slap some intelligence onto a device. So just be really careful with that. And if you think that they might not be getting an update, and you can put policies in place that force them off the network and allow them to not be able to have access, at least not have access to your critical information. Put them on a guest network that just has access to the internet or something like that.
Go hunt down that patch. If you got to go beat on your vendor to get it out there, because a lot of them lag behind 30, 60 days. This thing's announced. Get on them, get it patched.
Absolutely. And that's going to cover this week's episode. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you, and we would love to hear what you think. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? Do you have opinions on what we just talked about? Feedback at itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com or at itsparkcast on X. Over the last week, there were a lot of earnings calls from a number of IT vendors, and we haven't touched on that. Is that something you want us to cover? Do you want us to summarize the calls and then give you our interpretation of what they really mean? Is that company in trouble, or is that company posed for growth? Is it something that you want to know? Let us know. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That's really going to help us grow. Tell your friends and colleagues about us, and hopefully you feel like you're getting a lot of great information from us. If you do, let somebody else get the same great information as well. We're going to be back on Wednesday with a continuation of our series on remote work, and on Friday next week for more news and opinions from the world of enterprise IT. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.